I'm here to debunk a metabolic myth and look at the beautiful mechanics at work in the human body. Let's start with a hypothetical situation. Picture this. You and your coworker just completed a marathon. It's the day after your 26.2-mile slog. You're on your way up the stairs to your office. Your muscles are screaming in painful protest every step of the way. Your terrible coworker, who convinced you to run the marathon in the first place, turns to you and says, "Man, my legs are killing me. It must be all that lactic acid." How do you respond? Well, you might just turn your coworker's world upside down and tell him that lactic acid is no more a problem than the carb loading he did the night before the race. In fact, lactic acid leaves long before your muscle feels sore the next day. Modern athletic culture uses lactic acid, or lactate as I'll refer to it, as a scapegoat for post-exertion aches and pains. But reality is far more fascinating. Lactate is pivotal in fueling our muscles. To illustrate this, let's draw an analogy, comparing our muscles to a house. Modern-day homes run on electricity, which powers everything from our lights to our refrigerators. Fortunately, we live in a day where our houses are directly connected to a power grid, which supplies reliable power on demand. Throughout the day, you will use different amounts of energy depending on your various activities. For example, your kids may be terrible at turning off the lights, something that uses up vast amounts of patience, which my dad can attest to, but relatively little amounts of power. On the other hand, you could be cooking something in the oven and running the dishwasher in preparation for a big event that night. In this case, you'll be using substantially more energy. Likewise, our bodies rely on nutrients to provide power in an amount that fluctuates based on physical activity. Muscles drive things like running, jumping, and weightlifting. Muscles even handle the small but critical things, such as smiling and blinking. A molecule called ATP fuels that muscle. Envision ATP as the electricity powering our homes. ATP powers both actions that are both big and small. With that said, similar to lights not functioning during a power outage, our muscles cease to function when our ATP becomes too low, potentially even halting us in our tracks. Fortunately, our houses and muscles exist within a well-designed energy grid that supplies reliable power on demand. For our muscles, this energy grid is the blood, which distributes nutrients to all the organs in the body. Within this metabolic network, the liver emerges as the power control station, orchestrating metabolic functions to maintain energy balance and other bodily functions. The liver processes and distributes nutrients to all the tissues. The liver is unique because it can produce glucose. It ensures that all the tissues receive an adequate supply of glucose, whether that's for fueling our muscles during exercise or powering our brain's cognitive functions. Our communities have an array of energy generation methods, including sources like coal, wind, and solar. In each case, a power generator converts the various forms of energy into electricity to power our homes. Likewise, our bodies use energy stored as glucose and converts that energy into ATP through two metabolic pathways. One method or metabolic pathway that our body uses is dependent on oxygen. This oxygen-dependent method is really efficient at producing ATP. But the need for oxygen can be limiting during exercise, for example. So how does our muscle continue to produce ATP when oxygen is low? Like our local community power grids, our muscles have backup generators that take over when our consistent power sources don't have sufficient resources. Our backup generator during low oxygen conditions, such as sprinting, produces 2 ATP per glucose, whereas our oxygen-efficient generation system produces around 30 ATP per glucose. Our backup generator may be inefficient, but it still produces ATP to maintain muscle function while oxygen levels are low. In addition to producing ATP, Our backup generator produces a byproduct of glucose breakdown called lactate. Lactate is unique because the liver can convert that lactate back to glucose to refuel our backup generator. Now let's take a step back and look at how all these processes work together while we are sprinting. How many of us have felt out of breath while exercising? I think it's safe to say we all have. When we undergo intense exercise, our muscles rapidly consume ATP. When muscles don't have sufficient oxygen, they have to quickly and efficiently switch from the efficient generation of ATP to our backup generator. This backup generator in the muscle consumes glucose and converts it into lactate to produce ATP. This lactate is then transported from the muscle to the liver, where the liver can then convert that lactate back into glucose. This glucose is then transported from the liver back to the muscle to refuel the backup generator. Simple, right? Of course not. There's a lot going on here, and surprisingly, we still don't understand all the steps how all of these steps work together. In other words, lactate is crucial to fueling our muscles during exercise. It is not the culprit for our pain, but rather an integral part of this power-producing pathway. Interestingly, my research focuses on a protein that is a key part of this power pathway, called lactate dehydrogenase. Lactate dehydrogenase you can think of as a factory worker who can run a conveyor belt in two directions, both forwards and backwards. Lactate dehydrogenase can either help convert glucose into lactate or can help convert lactate into glucose, depending on the body's current needs. Humans who have insufficient levels of lactate dehydrogenase experience symptoms such as tiredness and muscle fatigue. My research aims to understand how the speed of the conveyor belt that lactate dehydrogenase operates is both swiftly and dynamically regulated. To test this, I isolated lactate dehydrogenase from cells and discovered that ATP directly binds and inhibits lactate dehydrogenase, and even could show in atomic detail where ATP binds lactate dehydrogenase, as well as how the binding of ATP directly influences the shape of lactate dehydrogenase. We believe that by understanding the relationship between ATP and lactate dehydrogenase will be important to understanding how our muscles are powered. While we have yet to test this in a living animal, we believe that ATP is critical to regulating muscle and liver lactate usage. Our theory is that when we are resting and energy availability is high, that the conveyor belt that lactate dehydrogenase operates is slowed down by the high ATP levels, thus reducing the lactate usage in both the liver and the muscle. On the other side, when we are exercising and ATP is rapidly depleted, we believe that the lactate dehydrogenase conveyor belt would speed up, thus increasing lactate production from the muscle, as well as lactate to glucose conversion in the liver. ATP's ability to govern the speed at which lactate dehydrogenase operates ensures that the lactate usage is appropriate for our body's needs. Understanding the nuances of metabolic pathways sheds light on how our body functions and has practical implications for our health and well-being. The more we learn, the more we understand that each of our bodies generates and regulates power in complicated but beautiful ways. In fact, we even know that muscle soreness is caused by small tears in our muscle, which causes inflammation, as our bodies rebuild, grow, and become stronger. Thus, lactate is not a villain to be feared, but an unsung hero in our quest to conquer life's big physical challenges. Let us hope that the next time we run, that both our liver and muscle continue to utilize lactate. Research like mine will continue to illuminate new understanding of how our bodies generate, regulate, and deliver power. Ideally, we will move beyond just debunking myths to constructing new ways to support our body's natural power schemes.